The same could be said for wide receiver. I'm giving them an A, and I'm going to lead off with Keyshawn Smith, who comes over from Miami. And really, I think with Keyshawn, and I kind of went back and forth on maybe A minus with this group overall, because they added Jordan Hudson, who we'll get to. They added Romelo Brinson. They added Keyshawn Smith. But you also saw Keyshawn Smith maybe not take as much, I guess. He didn't really like seize it like you maybe thought he would. But he was adjusting to new settings. We'll kind of see what happens when the fall rolls around. He has that playmaking ability. He is smooth. He's got the athleticism, and he is really competitive. Where he probably needs to get to it is on the jugs machine. I felt like at times he could have had some relatively easy receptions, didn't lock in and focus, and dropped a couple passes. So Keyshawn Smith is somebody that now, when you have Jordan Hudson coming into the mix, he could be maybe overtaken by Moochie Dixon. But last year he had 13 catches for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's also a bit of a game breaker in the return game, which I think is very important for SMU. They've had guys like Jordan Kerley do that. Jake Bailey can do that. They signed Jackson Lavender, who I think can do that. But adding another piece to the return game will be really nice for SMU. I think he's somebody that can do that. Took a kickoff against Bethune-Cookman back 72 yards. And I think with 3 years of eligibility remaining, you're looking at a guy who has a chance to develop under Rob Likens and get back on that trajectory that he was at maybe earlier in his career. And he just really has a lot of the pieces to the puzzle to be a great receiver. He's just got to bring that out a little bit more now that he's gone through spring. He's maybe adjusted to his new surroundings here in Dallas. But he has all the talent in the world. I'm going to go to Jordan Hudson next because he is, an outside receiver who I feel like is going to challenge right away for a starting job now that he's on board. He played in 14 games with the Frogs in 2022, his true freshman season. Caught 14 passes for 174 yards and 3 scores. He'll have 4 years to play 3 seasons. But the expectation is for Jordan Hudson, the former 5-star on 3, to step right into that lineup and play a ton this season. And there are a lot of people that are talking about what he can bring to the table now that he's on board. You talk about guys that have not displayed issues catching the football. That's Jordan Hudson. He's very competitive going up for the ball. He's not necessarily a burner like we've seen at times in the past, like a Reggie Robertson or a Danny Gray. He is smooth, runs really nice, crisp routes, and he was one of the most productive receivers in the country coming out of Garland High School, and that's why we named him a 5-star on 3, is he just was that dominant. And now that he has Rob Likens, who has coached up Rashee Rice, who talked him up in a big way, very complimentary of what Rob Likens did for him this past season, Biletnikoff Award semifinalist and all of those things. Jordan Hudson has that opportunity at SMU. He has that opportunity to be the next great wide receiver. I think he could start this season and really put it together if he comes in and does the things that they're going to ask him to. And I don't think there's any reason to think otherwise that he won't. I think he's motivated. We saw what happened when he left TCU, and he clearly wasn't comfortable there the last few months. This is a guy that is going to have a big chip on his shoulder because of all the things said about him. He's he wasn't running, that high in the depth chart. Look, that is spin. I've read some of the practice reports. He was right there in the mix to be a starter and a key contributor for TCU. And he was a guy that coming out of high school, you want to keep. We've talked about Jordan Hudson in the past podcasts about when you have a 5-star, you don't want to see him leave, period. End of story, unless he's a complete cancer, doing bad things off the field. So the spin coming out of Fort Worth on Jordan Hudson is quite funny to me, because when you go back and you look at what he did as a high school prospect and you look at the role he had on a team that went to the national championship game with those receivers that they also had running around out there. He's got a really bright future, and now it's going to be at SMU. I would be very surprised if he doesn't put together one of the better careers we've seen from SMU receivers as of late. So he's now factoring into that outside receiver spot, and Moochie Dixon and Keyshawn Smith, they're all going to battle for that time opposite of Jordan Kerley, who had a terrific spring. So you have those two really probably the guys that are expected to, start one or the other and play a ton. Romelo Brinson is a guy that came on really strong at the end of spring and has that bouncy athleticism that people covet at the wide receiver position. And with Romelo, look, he's pretty thin, but he is also incredibly athletic for, a guy that when you look at his legs, you're like, man, how can he get up and get some of the balls that he does? But he is a highlight reel machine. And the last 2 weeks of spring practice, I felt like were his best. And it was very clear things were starting to click for him. I didn't really observe too many issues catching the football. He's not necessarily a guy that's a straight line sprinter type. He's a straight line kind of jump ball, go get it type. And that is pretty key in this offense. And the way we saw SMU use Rashee Rice and throw some of those tags on there to draw a pass interference penalty, that could be what Romelo Brinson could bring to the table. He's got some developing to do. He's got to continue to refine his route tree. But he caught 14 passes for 189 yards and a touchdown over 2 seasons with the Hurricanes. He isn't really necessarily as proven as the other guys at that wide receiver position. So with those 3 that they added, I think you get an A. And, I didn't really think twice about, all right, maybe they got an A- because Keyshawn Jackson went elsewhere. That was somebody who SMU was on. That was another factor kind of degrading this class is did you miss, did you hit on who you were going after? And for the most part, SMU obviously hit on wide receiver, but I think Jordan Hudson's future is so bright that there's no way I could have dropped them down to an A- just for missing on Keyshawn Jackson, because in the end, it works out. You add Keyshawn Smith, who's a veteran, and instead of, maybe adding another veteran, Keyshawn's had a couple years, you add Jordan Hudson, who is the clear cut. I mean, if you're talking long-term future at SMU for wide receivers, I mean, Jordan Hudson and Jamarian Carroll starting opposite of each other is going to be pretty special for really what would be kind of maybe the back two years of Jordan Hudson. When those two kind of get together, I just think it's going to be really special to see the talent in this room that is now solidified for the next 3+ seasons. And Jordan Hudson was such a big part of that.